No one knew that a freezing, snowy night in Greenville, Colorado would change one man's life forever. At that moment, Derek Monroe, owner of a small garage called Monroe Auto Solutions, was struggling with the cold, unforgiving numbers spread across his desk. Outside, the wind howled fiercely and thick snow blanketed the empty streets. While families gathered around cozy Thanksgiving dinners, Derek sat alone in his dimly lit office, quietly facing a harsh reality. His garage, once the pride of his family built by his late father, now felt like a fading legacy. Customers had become rare expenses, kept climbing, and bills piled up relentlessly. Just weeks earlier, Derek had been forced to lay off a trusted employee. The weight on his shoulders made the idea of joining his sister and nieces for a family dinner feel like an impossible luxury. Still, he promised he would make it even if his heart felt heavier than ever. As he was about to leave the garage and head home, his phone suddenly rang. A strange number. He hesitated, but decided to answer. "Hello, this is Monroe Auto Solutions." Derek speaking. On the other end of the line, a desperate voice broke through the silence. A woman named Sophia Langford, along with her husband and their 2 young children, were stranded on a snow-covered highway. Their car had suddenly broken down. No one else had answered the phone, and the brutal cold was turning their situation dangerously grim. Derek could hear the faint sound of children softly crying in the background. He glanced at the clock. By now, he should have been sitting around the table with his family, laughing and enjoying Thanksgiving dinner. But in that instant, he didn't hesitate. There was no weighing of pros and cons, only instinct. He knew exactly what he needed to do. "Keep the kids warm. I'm on my way," Derek assured her firmly. Without wasting a second, he jumped into his old pickup truck and drove straight into the blizzard. The road was slick and treacherous, but his determination burned hotter than the raging storm outside. What no one knew was that the moment Derek turned that key and hit the road, his life's path quietly shifted forever. When he arrived, the scene before him was heartbreaking. A family huddled inside their lifeless car, desperately trying to stay warm with thin jackets. Victor Langford, the husband, rushed out anxiously to meet Derek, while Sophia clung tightly to her shivering children. Derek didn't hesitate. Right there in the freezing midnight snow, he got to work inspecting their car. It wasn't a quick fix, far from it. The repairs couldn't be done roadside. Without thinking twice, he made a decision. He would tow their SUV back to his garage. Not for profit, not for recognition, but because he knew exactly what it felt like to be stuck, and most importantly, because no child deserved to sit another moment longer in that kind of cold. What Derek didn't know, however, was that the family inside that broken-down SUV wasn't just any family, and he could never have guessed that the man he was helping, Victor Langford, happened to be the chairman of one of America's largest automotive empires. This was only the beginning. Monroe Auto Solutions, though built on decades of honest labor and family pride, had become a fading relic in the fast-paced world of modern automobiles. But when Derek opened the garage door and welcomed the Langfords inside, he didn't just offer them temporary shelter from the storm. Without realizing it, he was inviting them into the heart of his own turbulent story. Inside the garage, the warmth from an old space heater barely held back the chill creeping through every corner. Still, Derek moved quickly, arranging a makeshift seating area, brewing a pot of coffee and handing over a couple of thin blankets for the kids. Sophia Langford whispered, "Thank you," over and over, her voice still trembling with worry. The 2 children curled up on a worn-out bench, clutching a box of crayons their mother had packed for them. Derek didn't ask questions. Derek went about his task with steady, methodical focus, checking every component, muttering softly as he tightened bolts and examined wiring. It was the kind of presence that only comes from someone who has given their whole life to the craft. Victor could easily recognize the signs of a man struggling. The peeling walls, outdated machinery, and a faded handwritten price board encased in cracked plastic. This clearly wasn't a thriving business. And yet it was the way Derek treated his family with pure, unconditional kindness that made Victor stop and think. Meanwhile, Derek remained unaware of the watchful eyes fixed on him. All his focus was on the task at hand. The SUV's electrical system was seriously damaged. This wasn't something that could be fixed quickly. Still, he pressed on, wiping sweat from his brow, his cold hands moving steadily. Derek stayed committed. Holiday or not, Thanksgiving night or otherwise, helping people had always been his priority. At that moment, Sophia quietly opened up. She shared with Derek that they were on their way to Atlanta. Her mother was gravely ill. That hit Derek hard. He froze for a second, his heart heavy with empathy. He knew that pain all too well. He had lost his own mother, and the haunting memory of not being there during her final moments never left him. And now standing before him was a family teetering on the edge of experiencing that same heartbreak. "Don't worry," Derek said softly, but with calm certainty. "I'll do everything I can to make sure you get there in time." As Derek continued working under the dim lights, Victor quietly stepped away to make a phone call. But it wasn't just to inform relatives of the delay. He wanted to know more about this man, this mechanic who had willingly given up one of the most sacred nights of the year just to help complete strangers. The night crept on, and the snow outside kept falling thick and heavy. Still, Derek remained patient, methodical in every move he made. And slowly, the Langford family began to settle, comforted by the calm presence of the man helping them. What none of them realized was that in those quiet hours, in those simple, selfless gestures, something profound was taking root. Victor Langford couldn't shake the feeling. A thought began to form a quiet but powerful realization. Maybe, just maybe this raw authenticity, this quiet humanity, was exactly what the automotive industry had been missing all along. He didn't know it yet, but that selfless decision made without any expectation would soon become the key to unlocking a life-changing chapter. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, pale winter sunlight streamed through the dusty windows of Monroe Auto Solutions. Derek Monroe had returned to his usual routine. He brewed himself a weak cup of coffee, flipped open his ledger, and started combing through the endless stack of bills. The familiar worries hadn't gone anywhere. Bank loans still loomed overhead. Utility bills continued piling up. After the Langfords left the night before, reality had quietly crept back in, heavy and unrelenting as ever. Derek hadn't given much thought to the business card Victor Langford had handed him. To him, it was just a polite gesture, something many customers did at the end of a service. Still deep in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the image of those two children waving goodbye in the snowy night. The thought that they might make it in time to see their grandmother one last time gave him a quiet sense of peace, a soft, lingering feeling of purpose. But life didn't leave much room for Derek to hold on to that warmth for long. The days that followed were silent, almost eerily so. The phone barely rang. Business was slow. Derek spent most of his time tinkering with forgotten corners of the garage, fixing shelves, organizing tools, all while trying to keep his rising anxiety at bay. He knew the truth. If things didn't turn around within the next month, Monroe Auto Solutions would be forced to shut its doors for good. Then came that cold Monday morning. while Derek was crouched under an old pickup truck, hands covered in grease. A strange sound outside pulled him back to the present. Tires, smooth, heavy, expensive, crunching across a thin layer of snow. It wasn't the usual sound in this humble neighborhood. Wiping his hands on a rag, Derek pushed himself up and stepped outside. In front of him stood two sleek, jet-black luxury SUVs. These were not the vehicles of his usual neighborhood customers. As the car door opened, Victor Langford stepped out. But this time he wasn't the weary traveler from that snowy night. He emerged wearing a perfectly tailored suit, his sharp eyes radiating the unmistakable presence of a man used to running an empire. Derek froze for a moment, caught off guard and slightly on edge. A swirl of questions raced through his mind. Why was Victor back? What was going on? Victor, however, wore a warm, easy smile as he approached and extended his hand. Flanking him were two associates dressed in crisp business attire, clearly high-ranking members of some corporate executive team. Suddenly, the air around them felt different, formal, serious. The humble garage now seemed like the stage for something far bigger than Derek could have imagined. "Hello, Derek. I imagine you're a bit surprised to see me back like this." Victor began, his voice calm, yet layered with meaning. Derek nodded, doing his best to stay composed. "Yeah, I didn't think I'd see you again, at least not like this." Victor glanced around the old garage, his eyes scanning each detail as if measuring its soul. Then he spoke slowly, each word striking like a hammer, cracking through the thin ice of uncertainty. "I did some digging after that night. Looked into how you run this place, how your customers talk about you. They say you're one of the rare ones, someone who still holds on to honesty and heart in this business." He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "Derek, I'm expanding Langford Automotive Group. We're building a new chain of service centers across the country. But I'm not just looking for numbers on paper. I'm looking for people like you." Derek stood frozen. The weight of Victor's words hit him so hard he couldn't find the words to respond. But Victor wasn't finished yet. "To be more specific," he continued, his voice steady and clear, "I want Monroe Auto Solutions to become our flagship center, the very first model site of the new national network we're building. We'll invest in everything, new equipment, staffing, rebranding, you name it. But you, Derek, you'll still be the owner. You'll keep doing what you do best, taking care of people the way only you can. I have only one condition that you hold on to, the values you showed on that snowy night." For a moment, the entire world seemed to fall silent. Derek wasn't easily swayed by promises. He'd sat through too many dry, soulless meetings with banks and investors, obsessed with nothing but profit. But this felt different. It wasn't about numbers or contracts. It was about a man standing in front of him, a man who had lived the story firsthand. Victor wasn't offering a deal. He was offering trust, built from a moment when Derek's kindness had made all the difference. A part of Derek still hesitated. He asked bluntly, "So what's the catch? What will I have to give up for all of this?" Victor met his gaze, his expression more serious than ever. "There's no catch," he said firmly. "All we ask is that you continue being yourself. We want to build a place where customers feel respected, and I know you're the person who can make that happen." Derek lowered his head slightly, letting the weight of those words sink in. In that moment, it felt as if all the burdens he had carried for so long simply melted away. This was what he had always dreamed of, but he had never dared to believe it could actually come true. With resolve in his eyes, Derek reached out and shook Victor's hand tightly. "All right," he said quietly, but with conviction. Let's do this." Victor smiled warmly, gripping Derek's hand firmly, sealing a silent agreement between two men from entirely different worlds who had just forged an unbreakable bond. And just like that, through a simple act of selfless kindness, Derek Monroe unknowingly unlocked a brand new chapter of his life, a chapter of change, a chapter of hope, a chapter far bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Not long after that fateful handshake, Derek Monroe's life began turning a brand new page. Just days after finalizing the partnership, Monroe Auto Solutions, once as quiet and somber as its owner, suddenly came alive. Massive trucks bearing the Langford Automotive Group logo rolled in one after another, unloading crates of brand new equipment. Derek stood off to the side, quietly taking it all in, watching a scene he had only ever dared to imagine in his quietest dreams. State-of-the-art hydraulic lifts replaced the old, unreliable equipment that had been on the verge of collapse. The customer area, once nothing more than a few worn plastic chairs and a rusty coffee pot, was transformed into a warm, inviting space. There were plush sofas, a small bookshelf, and even a mini-play area for children. Derek slowly wandered through every corner of his changing shop, running his hand absent-mindedly across the freshly painted walls, still struggling to grasp that this was now his reality. But in truth, the biggest change didn't come from the new walls or shiny machines. It came from the people. Derek knew that for the garage to truly thrive, he needed a strong team. The first thing he did was pick up the phone and call the mechanic he had reluctantly let go just a month earlier. The man was nearly speechless when Derek asked him to come back this time with a better salary and improved benefits. "We've got a chance to start fresh," Derek said, flashing a rare but genuine smile, "and I want you to be part of that journey." After welcoming him back, Derek hired 2 young technicians as well. Monroe Auto Solutions was no longer just Derek's garage. It had become a second home, a place where an entire team could grow together. True to his word, Victor Langford stayed out of the day-to-day operations. He kept his promise, giving Derek full control over how things were run. And for the first time in years, Derek felt a sense of ease. He could focus on doing what he did best, taking care of customers and mentoring his team without the constant burden of overdue bills or the pressure of every purchase weighing on his shoulders. The grand reopening of the shop took place on a beautiful spring morning. A brand new sign gleamed proudly above the entrance. Monroe Auto Solutions, a Langford partner, the people of Greenville, many of whom had known Derek for years, gathered in droves. They shook his hand, clapped him on the back, and offered heartfelt congratulations. Some couldn't hide their admiration as they took in the garage's stunning transformation. Derek stood in the middle of it all, overwhelmed with gratitude and emotion. His mind drifted back to those bitterly cold nights, spent poring over every penny, to the moments of deep despair when he feared the shop might not survive. But now, not only had he saved his father's legacy, he had turned it into a symbol, a beacon of hope and resilience for the entire community. Yet even with everything looking brighter than ever, Derek remained true to who he was. They had rebuilt his life. For Derek Monroe's success was no longer measured by the numbers in his bank account or the size of his shop. It lived in something far more meaningful. In trust, in firm handshakes, and in the heartfelt thank yous from the customers he served. Just when he thought this new chapter had finally settled into peaceful rhythm, life had one more surprise waiting. Late one afternoon, as Derek was tidying up the customer lounge, the soft chime of the front door echoed through the shop. He looked up, and there they were, Sophia Langford and her 2 children. They weren't just carrying gratitude in their eyes. They had brought a story that had never fully been told. They weren't there simply to congratulate him. They had come to close an old chapter and to open a new, deeply emotional one. And that story, the one they were about to share, would soon carve itself into Derek's heart forever. A story that would remind him that every choice he had made, every act of kindness, meant far more than he could have ever imagined. That afternoon, something felt different inside Monroe Auto Solutions. The usual hum of laughter and casual chatter seemed to pause for a moment as the glass door gently swung open, revealing Sophia Langford and her 2 children. It had been a long time since that snowy night, but with just one glance, Derek recognized them instantly, the family he had once helped in their moment of greatest need. Sophia looked different now. Gone was the exhaustion, the worry that once clouded her face. In its place was a sense of peace, the kind that only comes after weathering a storm and making it through. The 2 children, now a little older, ran into the garage without hesitation, as if it were a place they had always known, a place that felt like home. "We didn't want to interrupt," Sophia said gently, her eyes shimmering with genuine emotion. "It's just, I never really had the chance to say thank you. Not the way I truly wanted to." Derek smiled warmly, wiping his oil-streaked hands on his familiar old rag before motioning them inside. But before Sophia could say another word, her son, now noticeably more confident, stepped forward, holding a neatly folded piece of paper. "I made this for you," the boy said shyly, yet with unmistakable pride in his voice. Derek gently took the paper and unfolded it. What he saw made him chuckle softly, his heart instantly touched. It was a child's drawing, playful and a little clumsy, showing him standing next to a massive car. Above his head, in large, uneven letters, it read, "Mr. Derek, the best car fixer in the world." For a brief moment, the usual sounds of the garage seemed to fade into silence. Derek knelt down slightly, running his fingers gently over the drawing, as if it were the most precious gift he had ever received. Because in that simple picture, he didn't just see crayon lines and a child's imagination. He saw himself, the quiet, determined mechanic who once only wished for just enough customers to keep his doors open. Now standing here as a hero in the eyes of 2 young kids. Sophia stepped closer, her voice trembling with emotion. "We made it to Atlanta that night," she said softly. "My mother, she passed away the following morning, but she got to see her grandchildren one last time. She got to hold them." Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she paused, then continued, "You didn't just fix our car, Derek. You gave my family something no one else could. Time, precious time with a loved one." Derek tightened his grip on the drawing, his throat tightening with emotion. He knew that pain all too well, the pain of losing a mother, and in that moment he realized that what he did that snowy night wasn't just an act of kindness for strangers. He had unknowingly helped write the final sacred moments of a family's story. Sophia's voice grew steadier, filled with deep gratitude. "Victor told me everything about what you've done here since that night. You didn't just keep your promise to our family. You turned this place into something bigger, a haven for the entire community. You have no idea just how much that means." Derek lowered his head, humble as always. "I just did what I thought was right," he said quietly. "It wasn't anything special." Sophia shook her head, her eyes steady and sincere. "No, you did something not everyone has the courage to do. You helped someone without expecting anything in return. That's what makes you different." By now, the 2 children were running around the garage, laughing and playing, without a care in the world. The sight made Derek smile without realizing it. In that moment, he understood. What he had built here wasn't just a newly upgraded garage filled with modern equipment. It was something more. It was a home, A place people could turn to when they needed help. A place where kindness wasn't a slogan, it was a way of life. As the Langford family prepared to leave, Sophia turned to him with one last thought. "We'd like to stay in touch more often," she said gently. "Whether as friends or whatever this may be, you've become part of a very important memory for our family." Derek nodded with warmth in his heart. He walked them all the way to the door, watching as their SUV slowly disappeared down the quiet neighborhood street. A deep sense of gratitude and fulfillment washed over him. Returning to his office, Derek carefully pinned the boy's drawing on the wall right next to an old photograph of his father. He stood there for a few moments, quietly taking it all in. 2 generations side by side. But for Derek Monroe, everything had changed. Monroe Auto Solutions was no longer just a little repair shop in Greenville. It had become something much more. A familiar place, a trusted haven, a cherished part of the community's story, where every handshake, every smile, and every act of kindness lived on. The new sign that gleamed above Monroe Auto Solutions, a Langford partner, was no longer just a mark of investment or expansion. Behind it lived a story of kindness, compassion, and the unwavering values Derek had held on to since the very first day he opened his doors. Old customers began to return, not just for repairs, but to share their own stories. A single mother, once anxious about affording car fixes, now felt at ease, knowing Derek always found ways to help. An elderly man who had been a loyal customer since Derek's father ran the shop still stopped by regularly, sometimes with a bag of fresh apples, other times just to sit and chat. The atmosphere inside the garage became something rare. It was warm, relaxed, and genuine, far from the rushed, impersonal feeling often found in other places. New employees, young men. Derek had brought on as the shop grew. With Victor Langford's support, small classes were held right there in the garage, where the hum of engines blended with laughter and curious questions from boys and girls holding a wrench for the very first time. "We don't just fix cars," Derek often told his team. "We fix broken dreams." Victor Langford, despite his busy role as the head of a massive corporation, became a regular visitor. Whenever he stopped by, he didn't wear suits or carry himself like a high-powered executive. "What you've built here," Victor said softly, his eyes reflecting genuine admiration, "is bigger than anything I ever imagined. That's why I chose you, Derek." Derek simply smiled, his eyes glowing with quiet pride. As time went on, a new tradition began to take root, especially on Thanksgiving. The garage no longer closed its doors on that special day. Instead, it opened them wider than ever before. It became a safe haven for those in need. Stranded drivers, families whose cars had broken down before they could make it home. Everyone was welcome. Repairs were done free of charge, and guests were invited to sit at a simple yet cozy table filled with hot coffee, sweet pastries, and endless stories shared between strangers who quickly became friends. 3 years had passed since that fateful snowy night. Monroe Auto Solutions had grown not just in size, but in spirit. It had become part of the community itself. A place where everyone, whether long-time customers or passing travelers, was welcomed with open arms and treated with kindness. And through it all, Derek remained true to himself. He was still the first to unlock the doors each morning, still the one crouching down, tightening bolts and changing tires with care. No matter how big the name Langford Partner became, he never let it overshadow the simple truth that guided him from the very beginning. Work with your hands, lead with your heart. One evening, after tidying up the garage from a long, busy day, Derek glanced over at the old drawing still pinned to the wall. the one young Langford had given him years ago. The crayon lines were fading, and the words, "best car fixer in the world," had grown pale with time. But to Derek, the meaning had never faded. He smiled softly and whispered to himself, it was never about the cars, it was always about the people. And he was right. For Derek Munro, this new journey, a journey built on trust, compassion, and quiet acts of goodness, had become the true legacy he hoped to leave behind in this world. 3 years had passed since that snowstorm night changed everything. For most, it might have seemed like just a small chapter in the long book of life. But for Derek Munro, each day since had been a milestone, a quiet reminder that when kindness is planted at just the right moment, it blooms in the most unexpected places. On another Thanksgiving day, just like every year, Munro Auto Solutions kept its doors open. By now, the garage had become a familiar refuge, a safe haven for those who found themselves stranded while trying to reunite with loved ones. Derek's team, young men who had once been students in his free training programs, now volunteered to stay and work. For them, this wasn't just about duty anymore. It had become tradition. A tradition built on simple kindness, started long ago by the man they now proudly called their boss. As dusk fell and the sky turned a soft purple, an old weary sedan pulled hesitantly into the lot. The car looked as though it had barely made the journey, worn down after hundreds of miles. Derek, who had been wiping down the customer lounge with his own hands, immediately set aside his task and stepped outside. From the car emerged a middle-aged man, his face drawn and tired. Behind him, 2 children climbed out, the older boy, no more than 10, tightly holding his younger sister's hand, trying his best to look brave. The man looked at Derek, his eyes filled with worry. "I'm so sorry, we're on our way to the hospital," he said, his voice tense and shaken. "My mother is in critical condition, but the car suddenly broke down. I honestly don't know what to do." Those words instantly pulled Derek back to that snowy night years ago. He saw it all again. Victor and Sophia Langford, desperate and vulnerable, caught in life's harsh storm. He remembered that feeling all too well. The feeling of standing helpless at the crossroads of hope and despair. Without hesitation, Derek nodded firmly. "Pull it in," he said with calm assurance. "I'll take a look right now." As his team sprang into action, Derek personally inspected the car. Thankfully, the issue wasn't too serious. A clogged fuel pump, but whether simple or complex, it didn't change the way Derek approached the situation. With practiced skill and unwavering care, he got to work. And within less than an hour, the old sedan was ready to hit the road again. The man looked at Derek, his voice trembling with emotion. I don't even know how to thank you enough," he stammered. "How could I ever repay you?" Derek wiped his hands on his familiar rag and shook his head gently. "There's nothing to repay," he said softly. "Just get to the hospital on time. Be with your mother. That's what matters most." The father stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed. Then, with tears welling in his eyes, he gripped Derek's hand tightly. His 2 children stood quietly beside him, bowing their heads in gratitude. The entire garage fell silent. No one spoke, but everyone understood. In that quiet, powerful moment, the true purpose of Munro Auto Solutions was reaffirmed. It wasn't just a garage, it was a place where kindness lived, as the old sedan drove away, leaving behind only a faint trail of exhaust in the cool evening air. Derek turned back toward the garage. Standing there, almost unnoticed until now, was Victor Langford. No longer the commanding CEO in a sharp suit. He wore a simple jacket, his hands tucked into his pockets, His face carried nothing but quiet admiration and heartfelt respect. "You didn't even hesitate," Victor said, his voice filled with pride. "It's been 3 years and you're still the same, Derek." Derek let out a soft laugh, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "Why would I ever change?" he replied gently. "If kindness once gave me a chance, then it's only right that I offer that same chance to others. That's how the world should work." Victor nodded in agreement, his expression warm and thoughtful. Together they stood quietly looking out through the garage doors. Outside, the soft glow of nearby homes and the joyful sounds of families gathering for the holiday painted a perfect picture of peace. That night, Monroe Auto Solutions was no longer just a place to fix cars. It had become something far more meaningful, a place that eased worries, a place that connected strangers through invisible threads of empathy and kindness. In that simple yet profound moment, the two men, one who had once been a stranger lost in a snowstorm, and the other, a struggling mechanic fighting to keep his dream alive, stood side by side like old friends. Both understood now more than ever that everything which had happened began with one incredibly simple choice. Kindness is never wasted. And here in Greenville, Colorado, at Monroe Auto Solutions, that truth had never rung louder. Derek Monroe hadn't changed. Even though his name had spread far and wide across the state, and his partnership with Langford Automotive Group had transformed his once small shop into a flagship center for the entire network, he held firmly to his old habits. Every morning, Derek was still the first to unlock the doors. He brewed a big pot of coffee, greeted each employee with a genuine smile, and before long he would be back under the hoods of cars, his hands stained with oil, never concerned with titles or status. Through the years, this garage had become more than a place to fix cars. It became a place that fixed lives. Young people who had once lost their way came here to learn a trade, and in doing so discovered a new path forward. Single mothers, lonely seniors. The tradition of keeping the garage open on Thanksgiving lived on. On that day, Monroe Auto Solutions always felt different. It wasn't filled with the usual sounds of engines roaring or tools clanking. Instead, laughter echoed from children playing, warm greetings filled the air, and the comforting aroma of hot meals drifted through the space. Travelers stranded on the road were invited in their cars, repaired free of charge. But more importantly, they were given something far greater, a place to share in the warmth of humanity during the coldest time of year. Late one evening, as another Thanksgiving drew to a close, Derek stood quietly by the garage door, watching. Under the soft golden glow of the lights, customers and employees mingled and laughed like one big family. He turned and gently touched the old framed drawing hanging on the wall, the same crayon sketch young Langford had given him all those years ago. The words, "Best car fixer in the world," had faded with time. But to Derek, the meaning had never lost its color. Victor Langford, now a close friend, stepped up beside Derek. He gently placed a hand on his shoulder and smiled with pride. "Look at what you've built," Victor said quietly, his gaze sweeping across the laughter-filled room. "It's not just a garage, it's a legacy." Derek smiled, but said nothing. He didn't need to, because he knew Victor was right. But for Derek, Monroe, none of this had ever been about legacy. It was never about recognition. He simply did what was right, just like he had on that snowy night years ago when he walked away from a warm family dinner to help a desperate stranded family he'd never met. Derek's story didn't have grand acts of heroism or cinematic twists. It had only one thing: kindness. And that kindness, when given at the right moment, had changed not only Derek's life, but had rippled outward touching an entire community and all the roads once traveled by strangers who never forgot what they found here. As night fell, Derek stepped back inside the garage, gently closing the door behind him. But deep down he knew that another door, the one within his heart and within this garage, would always remain open for anyone who needed it. And for every person watching this story today, perhaps the most important takeaway isn't about the success or recognition that Derek Monroe eventually earned. It's about a simple, powerful question we should all ask ourselves. When someone needs help, will you be ready to be their Derek? That year winter arrived later than usual. Snow had just begun to fall, dusting the rooftops and small streets of Greenville in a delicate white layer. But here, inside Monroe, Auto Solutions, the cold never truly found its way in. Because within these walls, the warmth of humanity, the spirit of generosity and connection, kept the air filled with something special. Something no blizzard could ever touch. Derek Monroe walked slowly down the aisle between the repair bays. The young employees, many of whom had once been students in the training program he had started, were hard at work. Under the warm golden lights, they weren't just honing their technical skills. They were learning something far more important: how to treat customers with the same sincerity and care that Derek had always lived by. No one talked much about the early days anymore. The stacked bills, the long nights spent crunching numbers, wondering how to keep the lights on, those were just memories now. But to Derek, they were not things to be forgotten. Instead, he carried them with him always. He often reminded himself and those around him of the road they had traveled. Others volunteered to support the community programs the garage had started, and every Thanksgiving, like an unspoken tradition, the garage's doors remained open for those in need. Derek and his team prepared hot meals and safe spaces for travelers stranded on their journeys. In the midst of winter's chill, no one who came through their doors ever had to worry about whether they could afford help. Here, everyone found warmth and comfort freely given. Without a second thought, Derek sprang into action just as he always had. Once the car was ready to hit the road again, the father reached for his wallet, offering to pay. But Derek simply shook his head. "Go," he said gently. "Being with your loved ones right now is what matters most. Consider this our Thanksgiving gift to you." The man gripped Derek's hand tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude too, moved to find the right words. His two children bowed respectfully, their eyes shimmering with trust and perhaps belief that the world was still full of good people. As they drove off into the cold night, Derek turned back toward the garage. Standing there quietly watching as always was Victor Langford. Gone were the suits and the aura of corporate power. He wore a simple winter jacket, his expression filled with pride and warmth. "You never changed," Victor said softly, his eyes reflecting every moment they had shared on this long road. Derek simply smiled a deep, knowing smile, the smile of a man who knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. "Because I know," Derek replied, "kindness never really ends. When someone gives it to you, your job is simple: keep it going." That night, long after everyone had gone, Derek stood alone in front of the old framed drawing, the crayon sketch gifted by young Langford years ago. He gently ran his fingers over the now faded words, "Best car fixer in the world." But deep down he knew he had never just fixed cars. He had mended things far more important: trust, hope, and the fragile connections that quietly tie people together. And so the story that began on a freezing winter night didn't end with applause or flashing lights, but in the simplest, most beautiful way. Through a quiet circle of kindness passed from one generation to the next. Because here at Monroe Auto Solutions, kindness was never just an action. it had become a legacy. As night settled over Greenville, the garage grew still once more. The team had all gone home after a long day, leaving behind a peaceful silence broken only by the soft ticking of the office clock. And there sat Derek Monroe, alone in the corner of the old office, bathed in the warm glow of a desk lamp, his face quietly worn by time, but lit with the quiet peace of a life well lived. On the wall across from him, memories were carefully preserved. The crayon drawing from young Langford group photos of his team, thank you cards from customers, and even a community award recognizing the garage's contributions. Together, they formed a vibrant mosaic, a living portrait of the journey he and so many others had shared. Derek slowly rose to his feet and stepped outside. He breathed in the crisp night air of Greenville, where the small streets still glowed softly under the warm lights of nearby homes. In the distance, the faint hum of traffic drifted through the quiet town. Life carried on seemingly unchanged, as though nothing particularly extraordinary had ever happened here. But Derek knew better. He understood that every single day in this place held its own quiet kind of extraordinary. He looked back at Monroe. Auto Solutions, now more than just a garage. It wasn't a symbol because of its size or profits. It was a symbol because it had become a second home for the community, a refuge for those in need. A place where dreams were rebuilt by young men and women who once thought they had no other chances. A place that stood as living proof of one simple yet powerful truth: kindness can change everything. Derek knew his journey was far from over. Tomorrow, the garage doors would open once again, laughter would echo, new stories would fill the air. But now, as he looked back on the road he had traveled, he had one message left to share, not just for himself, but for anyone who had ever heard his story. In today's world, a world where people grow more distant, where value is measured in numbers and accomplishments, kindness can sometimes feel small or even forgotten. But it's in the simplest moments, when we reach out to help someone expecting nothing in return, that we uncover life's truest meaning. Derek smiled quietly, his eyes reflecting a calm, steady faith. He knew that every time he helped someone, this story would continue, not in ink, but in action. Because here at Monroe Auto Solutions, where a mechanic once nearly lost everything but chose not to give up, kindness became the light that guided every journey forward. The story of Derek Monroe may have come to a close, but its message will live on. In this fast-paced world, kindness still matters. A simple act today could change someone's life tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, be sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next inspiring journey. And don't hesitate to share this video with your loved ones, because you never know whose life you might inspire to plant their own seeds of kindness. We'll see you in the next video, where kindness will always have a place to grow.